Welcome into the CBS Sports Network, where we are going to spend the next hour talking about college basketball from all angles. I'm Adam Finkelstein. I'm joined by Travis Branham, and we are in day 3 of the early signing period. So we're going to start on the recruiting front. Trav, it's been a busy first 72 hours already. We've seen St. John, South Carolina, all get early commitments. Purdue got the big fella who averaged 5 blocks per game in FIBA play, and Sanan Wan. So the big names are flying off the board. We're expecting 3 top 30 prospects to come off the board this afternoon. 2 of them will be right here on the CBS Sports various platforms, including Cameron Williams. I know you're in Arizona for that announcement right now. Before we get to those commitments, though, I want to ask you about what is coming up before this period comes to an end. And let's start with a guy named Baba Olatunde. He was the top-ranked prospect in the junior class initially. Now with the early signing period, people are wondering, will this newly ranked top 10 prospect in the senior class, will he come off the board before it's all said and done?
Yes, he is one of these players that we are anticipating will come off the board. He actually already has a commitment date scheduled for the last day of the early signing window, and that is for Wednesday, November 19th. And over the last 48 hours, I've been getting some new information. And this recruitment does sound to have some movement behind the scenes. Now, Arkansas entered this week as my favorite, but they held a slight lead. And the other 2 programs that I continue to hear more about is Maryland and Georgetown. And there's one thing of note with this recruitment is the proximity to home and staying close to his DMV roots, that is the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, has been a strong factor in this recruitment. And again, Arkansas held the slight lead entering the week, but I'm now hearing more buzz, particularly with Maryland. So I am now, as of today, classifying this one as a toss-up with these final 5 days ahead.
All right, sounds like no crystal ball yet from Trav, but Baba is not the only big name that we are expecting to come off the board next week. And again, this is after today. We're going to get Cameron Williams, Ethan Taylor. We expect Maxie Adams. Austin Gooseby will be Monday as well. That's also going to be on the CBS Sports platforms. But another name that we are expecting next week, the number 1 center in the country, Arafan Diane. What can you tell us about his process, and is that going to come to an end next week?
Yes, like Baba, Arafan will be announcing his decision on Wednesday, November 19th. And this is one exiting the summer. I had Houston pegged as the favorites. Now, he did take visits to schools like Kentucky, Arkansas, Indiana, and others. But even after all of these official visits from some of the biggest, best coaches and programs in the country, I still have Houston as the favorite. And I've even placed my crystal ball prediction in favor of the Cougars for that Wednesday announcement.
All right, I'm pretty sure Trav's crystal ball record is unblemished. Houston obviously has an interesting scenario there with Chris Senak, the freshman starting at the 5 spot right now. Very definite potential one-and-done prospect, so that would be an interesting trajectory for Dion to follow. Trav, I want to talk to you about Tyran Stokes. He's the number 1 ranked prospect in the national class, and he has been in the headlines this week. He was enrolled at Notre Dame High School in California. We saw it was announced that he withdrew, and then just last night it was announced that he was going to enroll in Rainier Beach in Seattle. Now, also attending that school is J.J. Crawford, who may be the best freshman in high school basketball. If that name sounds familiar, it is because he is the son of longtime NBA player Jamal Crawford. So obviously there were some ties there to Seattle. Now, on the recruiting front, Stokes is someone that we've been on the lookout for a potential commitment for almost a month now. He's down to 3 finalists, but as you look at this entire situation, from the high school scenario to how it impacts the college recruitment, what can you tell us about Stokes right now and what it means for his timeline?
Yeah, what happened over the last 2 weeks has certainly brought a bit of a more unpredictable factor. And this is always a bit of an unpredictable recruitment in terms of the uncertainty around it, how close Tyran likes to play things close to his best. Now he has down to 3 schools in Kentucky, Kansas, and Oregon. And for much of the last month, Kentucky has been the favorite in this recruitment. Amongst all the sources that I talked to, everybody seems to ultimately expect that he will end up as a Kentucky Wildcat. However, Kansas is a real factor here. And I do, based on my information, it sounds like there's strong mutual interest in the parties coming together for his college basketball season. However, it must be noted, Tyran is a signed Nike athlete now, and so you can't help but wonder how brand affiliation is going to impact the recruitment at the end of the day. So as of today, I still have Kentucky as the favorite in terms of where he will end up at school. When this will happen, that's unpredictable. Could it be this week? I'm not rolling it out. I do anticipate it'll probably be late November or December, but all things are on the table currently.
Yeah, I think Tyran Stokes has everybody guessing. Whether or not it comes before the early signing period comes to an end remains to be seen, but at least now we know where he will be playing his senior year of high school. Next, we will find out where he is playing his college basketball. All right, Trav, so we've talked about the names that we expect to come off the board before the end of this early signing period. Again, we're just 3 days in. We've already seen 3 top 100 prospects come off the board. We expect 3 more today, including all of whom are in the top 30 nationally, so it's going to be a big day. But let's talk about some of the players that we do not expect to sign early, who may extend this recruiting process out into the spring. Tyran Stokes is the number 1 ranked prospect in the country. We just talked about him. Jordan Smith is the number 2 ranked prospect in the country, and we are not expecting any sort of announcement from him this week. Is that right?
That is correct. I anticipate Jordan Smith he potentially could be the last player to come on board in this national class of 2026. There's been a lot of talk that's very confident that he will wait to that calendar year of 2026, but some talk that he could even wait until the spring. However, he's already taken 3 or 4 official visits, if I remember correctly. He's been to Duke for an official visit during his junior season, has been on a recent unofficial back to Duke, has also taken an official visit to Arkansas, and 1 to Kentucky. And one school that wasn't mentioned on the official visit list, but is deeply involved in this recruitment, based on my information, is Georgetown. And now Duke has been considered a bit of a favorite in this recruitment. However, Georgetown, and particularly John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks, have been. It's been made very clear to me that Arkansas, in particular, is a major threat in this one.
All right, that one very seemingly going to go all the way down to the wire. I want to talk to you about another guy who's very similar, top 5 prospect, Caleb Holt, another big physical guard. Like Jordan Smith, I think he's one of the more reliable players in the class. I think he's one of the players who has a chance to come right into college basketball and impact winning from day one. He's another one that we are not expecting any sort of announcement from this week. He's going to let the year play out by all accounts. Is that what you're expecting?
Yeah, this one is going to take another few weeks to play. I would anticipate that this one will be over before the end of the 2025 calendar year. And entering the week, I had Kentucky as the favorite. It sounds like there's a very strong interest both on the Kentucky and the Holt side of things. However, over the last 48 hours, I've actually been getting some new information that this could be pivoting away a bit from Kentucky, with Alabama and Arizona emerging here. Now, Alabama is the home state school, and obviously there's going to be a strong draw to go back home, play for Nate Oates, but Arizona is a sleeper here. Do not rule them out. Do not count them out. They got involved recently, got them on for an official visit, and by all accounts, it sounds like they are firmly in the mix for this recruitment.
All right, Trev, last player I want to ask you about is Deron Rippey Jr. Came out of the summer as the 2nd-ranked point guard in the class, but this fall he has made a strong case to crack the top spot in terms of pure point guards. Great on-ball defender, just a total worker, has all those leadership intangibles from Blair Academy in the New Heights 3SSB grassroots program. You see him in that USA basketball jersey. He shined in those settings as well. What do we know about Deron Rippey Jr.?
Yeah, his has been one of the toughest recruitments to get a real grasp on where he's leaning and where he could ultimately be heading. This is a complete toss-up, in my opinion, right now. He's about to cut his list one final time before making a college decision. And the teams that I'm hearing that are likely to end up on that list include NC State. He just took a visit there. It was his final official visit, and there's been a lot of buzz with people speculating that they are the perceived leader. I'm not ready to classify them as leader, but they are definitely a contender here. Another team is Tennessee, Duke, Kentucky, Miami. It's a long list of teams involved here, and I think there's going to be some movement over the coming weeks before he makes a decision.
All right, that is a breakdown of some of the top players in the country and what we're expecting before this early signing period comes to a close. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk about some of the best college basketball programs in the country and how they're stacking up against one another with their recruiting classes to date. We are in the midst of the early signing period, and when that began on Wednesday, Kansas sat atop the national rankings. They were followed by Missouri, but Purdue has made a jump following Sinan Juan's commitment just about 48 hours ago. You see other schools like Missouri, Oklahoma State, Michigan State have rounded out the top five. Trav, going to go right back over to you, and I want to talk about some of these schools that have opened up the fall on just a real recruiting run. Let's talk first about Bill Self and the Jayhawks. Their class is built around Talon Kinney, and for all of those parents watching at home, yes, he is the originator of that 6'7" stuff that your kids are driving you crazy with. Beyond that, though, Trav, talk to me about what else makes this class the number one group in the country.
Yeah, they got a bunch of complimentary pieces around him following his commitment. They went on a spree with Trent Perry, one of the best athletes in the class, a high character kid, a player that's going to come in, play with a high motor, and defend at a high level with his offensive game being a work in progress. Followed shortly after him was Davion Adkins, one of the top bigs in the class, a guy who's really been figuring things out on the court. He has great length. He's a tremendous athlete, and he's really been honing his game in on how he can impact the game in the paint with his rim protection, his rebounding, his lob catching, and finishing around the rim. And there is some offensive upside as we've seen his ability to step out and make some shots out some mid-range. And then lastly, Luke Barnett, arguably the best shooter in the country, one that was fairly under-recruited, especially according to our guy, Eric Boston. We both know how high he is on him. He's a deceptive athlete, but again, he is an absolute sniper from deep. And so they came in late and were able to land his commitment. And there's one more player to know and watch here in this 2026 class for Kansas, and that is they already have the 2027 commitment in four-star guard Javon Bardwell. And he is one that is on reclass watch, one that we do anticipate there is a good chance he could end up in the 2026 class, further strengthening their grip on this top spot. And then also lastly, as we were discussing earlier, they're firmly in the mix for Tyran Stokes. And if they were to get that one across the board, this would be the first time, I believe, in the history of 24/7 Sports that Bill Self and the Kansas Jayhawks finish with the number one overall recruiting class.
It would also be the first time that a Nike-sponsored NIL athlete committed to an Adidas school. So that is certainly a dramatic storyline to watch here in the coming months. Trav, I want to ask you a little bit about Mizzou, because there was a narrative earlier this fall and even late into the summer that recruiting was getting off to this slow start. The college coaches were waiting to see what the rev share numbers were going to look like. They weren't sure how much to allocate to these players because obviously that negotiation is at the heart of even high school recruiting right now. Mizzou was the exception to that rule. Dennis Gates went out and he prioritized Jason Crow Jr. Jason Crow Jr. is the number 3 ranked prospect in the country. He committed to Mizzou back in July. It was live right here on CBS Sports HQ and various CBS Sports platforms. After that, he went out and he got Tony Bryant, an athletic forward. Then he went and got Aiden Chronister, a shot-making big wing. So he went all in on this high school class, kind of zigged when everybody else zagged. I wanted to ask you about that approach. And now that we're a few months down the line, how do you think that's going to work out? Because they're obviously they're in the top 3 of the recruiting rankings right now. But when everybody else was hitting the brakes, they were hitting the gas. In retrospect, was that the right move for the Tigers?
Absolutely. Now, I do think that there's some serious strengths to waiting this out, and I think we're going to continue seeing play that out. And just on that topic of this being a slow class, I mean, it's still been a slow class. We still have 14 of the top 25 players available right this second. Now, as you said, we're going to have 3 come off the board today, but I do think there's a big positive side to getting your recruiting done on the high school ranks early. Now you can begin your portal work now, and also you can begin kind of not necessarily, obviously you're not coaching these players, but you can continue working on their development. In this case, the one that comes to mind the most is Tony Bryant. He's a player we have been very familiar with for a long time and seeing how he's developed his game. And when he's at his best, he's one of the best rebounders and rim protectors in the country with a lot of offensive potential and tools to his game to tap into. Now he's been in a place in the development process of trying to piece it all together. And I think with him on board, you can go ahead and start with the feedback you can give him, the constructive feedback, and preparing him to come on the campus. So at the end of the day, for a school like Missouri particularly, I do think this is going to pay off in big ways.
All right, now let's talk about Purdue. Matt Painter, on more than one occasion, has called into question the validity of recruiting rankings. I like to point out that his teams are usually better when he gets the highly ranked guys, but, I digress. He got his fourth commitment this week, third nationally ranked prospect, Sinan Wan, who is at Georgetown Prep in D.C., but played with the Chinese national team at the FIBA U19 World Cup this summer, averaged 5 blocks per game. So yes, there is another 7-footer coming to Purdue, and he is another very good player, although one who might need some patience. Before that commitment, he had built up what I expect to be one of the better incoming backcourts in college basketball, and Luke Ertel and Jacob Weber. Now, two-part question for you. Do we expect Purdue to be done now that they have 4 commitments? And although they've jumped into the top 3 right now, do you expect them to stay there by the end of the week?
Yes. Based on what I've gathered, it seems like they're essentially done with their high school recruiting class, and they will firmly be in the top 5. There's still several teams. I'm looking at 4 off the top of my head that I do anticipate will move into the top 10 this week and won't be done recruiting yet. So there will be some shaking up to do. But this class that Purdue has put together is really impressive to me. And as you said, Luke Ertel, he's one of my favorite players to watch in the country. Yeah. He's not super exciting. He's not an explosive athlete, but you're not going to find many players as skilled and as smart as he is with the ball in his hands. Just has a knack of getting anywhere he wants on the court. Just a knockdown shooter, both off the catch and dribble, and makes all the right plays out on the court. Very competitive, very smart. Love what Purdue's getting. And as you said, Jacob Weber, a guy who really came on late back in July on the 3SSB circuit, really skilled, smart scorer and shot maker. And then you add in Sinan Wan, a 7-footer that actually he debuted in our rankings as a top 25 prospect, and he's figuring things out now. After he slid down the rankings, he's back on the rise again as one of the top rim protectors, rebounders, and he's a very mobile big man. So I think he has a bright future ahead of him at Purdue.
All right, now we alluded to this in the first segment, but there are some major dominoes set to drop just this afternoon alone. We've got Cameron Williams set to announce his commitment. You are in your hotel room right now, about to drive over for that very announcement. Later on CBS Sports HQ, we've got Ethan Taylor, one of the 2 best centers in the national class. He will announce his commitment today. Maxie Adams, another top 25 prospect. He's expected to announce his commitment today. So 3 major dominoes. We talked about Austin Gooseby, Baba Olatunde, Arafan Diane, all of those guys expected to come off the board in the next week. So my question to you, we looked at what the recruiting rankings are like now. Fast forward a week from now, and is there a school that you think has a chance to jump into the top spot based on what happens in the next few days here?
Yeah, that team is the Michigan State Spartans. Now, they are heavily in the mix, both with Ethan Taylor and Maximo Adams, as it comes down to the finish line. And I do anticipate they will get one of the 2. And with either one of their commitments, they will move into that number 1 spot. And based on all the looming commitments, you haven't mentioned Miles Sadler, who is expected to announce on Sunday. You mentioned Austin Gooseby, but there are others who will be committing here this week. And so even with all those commitments, I anticipate that Michigan State has a very high chance of ending this week with the number 1 overall recruiting class. But again, the Blue Bloods aren't done. Kentucky, North Carolina, neither school, both mega programs, Blue Blood programs, have yet to land their first 2026 commitment. And so even looking further ahead into the late signing period, this class, there's still a lot to shape out with Kentucky still heavily in the mix with Tyran Stokes. Christian Collins is one of those players that we anticipate will be making a decision this week. One of the most talented players in the class with a tremendous amount of upside. With what things can shape out, as I mentioned earlier, they're still in the mix with Caleb Holt as well. So if Kentucky can land 3 or 4 of those 5-star recruits that they are still recruiting, they could potentially move into that number 1 spot. Duke has a long way to go still with some of these recruits that they're involved with. As we mentioned, Cameron Williams will be announcing his college decision today. Duke is one of those 3 finalists. And again, Jordan Smith, the number 2 overall prospect, they're heavily in the mix with. One team that's not on the list that I anticipate will move into the top 10 here sooner rather than later is Alabama. Nate Oates and the Crimson Tide have a quietly good recruiting class right now working for them. They have a top 50 recruit in Taurus Bowie and a top 60 recruit in Christopher Washington. But one But one player that I'm keeping my eye on this week is Caden Samuels. He is down to two schools in Alabama and Georgetown, and a decision could come anytime over the next 2 weeks. And I have put in a crystal ball prediction over at 24/7 Sports for Alabama. So for more on this, head over to 247sports.com. We'll see you guys here soon.
Welcome back into the CBS Sports Network, where I am now joined by my colleague, Isaac Trotter. And I'm going to be honest, Trotter is one of my favorite people to talk ball with. He is a ball knower. And what we are going to do on this pod is we are going to try and peel the onion back a little bit and just give you a little bit more detail about what's happening between the lines. And this week, we're about 2 weeks into the college season. We're going to try and take a look at some teams that are better than expected and some teams that are worse than expected, because already a lot of those preseason narratives are being turned on their head. Trotter, you're the optimist of the group, so I'm going to let you go first. Who is a team that has been better than you've expected so far?
Yeah, I think I may have messed up with Gonzaga a little bit. I had them in my tier 3 of national championship contenders of like a good team, but we'll see if they can get up to that great tier. Early on, this team has been awesome. And, getting Tyon Grant-Foster eligible is huge and a big part of that. But to be honest, it's really just the depth and the defense that's really surprised me early. The Zags got like 10 or 11 dudes that they could absolutely play, and they're enormous. They had a lineup yesterday against Creighton in their win where they basically held Creighton for like almost 7 minutes without scoring. They had a lineup where their shortest guy on the floor was Mario St-Superi, who's like 6'4", 205, one of the bigger point guards in college basketball. They're huge. They have great length. Emmanuel Nascente can heat up the basketball. Tyon Grant-Foster can guard. Adam Miller can guard. They're playing a double big lineup this year with Braden Huff and Graham Ike, so you kind of know what you're getting inside the paint. And the point guard play, like I'm a Ryan Nembhard like super fan. He's probably like one of my 5 favorite players I've ever watched in college basketball. He's unbelievable. I thought they would really miss him this year. Early on, Mario St-Superi's been awesome, and Braden Smith, the transfer out of Colgate, not the other Braden Smith, the one from Colgate, really nice player as well. So I think Gonzaga, I would move them up into that maybe that second tier of national title contenders. Still some questions that need to be answered, but this is easily a top 10 to 15 team in the country.
Yeah, and I think that emphasis on positional size is going to be something that you are going to continue to hear as we talk about teams who have overachieved. In fact, it is a component of the team I'm going to talk about, and that's North Carolina. Now, obviously, the injury to Seth Trimble, that is a big, big blow. And quite frankly, I don't know how that happens on a lat pull-down machine in a weight room. Of course, he broke his arm. He's out 6 weeks. I just can't fathom it. But that notwithstanding, I thought that win over Kansas, they looked great. And I'm going to tell you this, they are playing like Gonzaga with extreme positional size. Caleb Wilson is the guy that everybody's talking about. He had 20 points in 4 straight games, if you count the 2 preseason contests. And obviously he was a big name freshman coming in ahead of where I expected him to be offensively. I knew he was a big time athlete, knew he was a big time defender. But I think it's a great fit. I think it's a great fit for the way Hubert Davis wants to coach. I think he's very comfortable operating this high-low system. I think Caleb Wilson has got immediate chemistry with Henry Vesar. And I think with Jaron Stevenson, Jaron Stevenson, to me, the Alabama transfer, he's a stretch 4. Caleb Wilson, to me, is a hybrid 4, in my opinion. And I know the fans and people who get sensitive about positions are going to push back on this. They're starting a 5, a stretch 4, and a hybrid 4. And they're just tweaking the lineups enough where like it kind of works, because Caleb Wilson is versatile enough defensively to guard multiple positions, then fly around the floor. Jaron Stevenson can shoot the ball, so he can give you the floor spacing. And then the big fella is such a good passer. It allows them to flourish in all those high-low actions. So I'm higher on North Carolina, even in the backcourt, even when you got Luka Bogovac. He's 6'6" and he's 22 years old. So they are huge. 1 through 5, because Trimble is 6'3" and strong himself. But this is my question, and I'm curious what you think on this. With Trimble going down, this is about to be a referendum on whether or not they have enough depth in their backcourt. It's one thing to beat up on these teams that are guarantee games. Guarantee games is a fancy way to say they are paying those teams to play them. Everybody in college basketball does it. But at the end of the month, things are going to start to get complicated again. And what do things look like without Seth Trimble? Do they have enough depth at the point guard position? What are your thoughts on that?
It's really Derek Dixon, I think, to me, that will get a lot of chance to get some burn off the bench as like that sixth man. And every time I watch him, he's just so solid. He guards, he makes good plays for others, he can make open shots, doesn't make a ton of mistakes. So I think that'll be a big, kind of referendum if they can get him going. But obviously, I think the biggest X factor for this group is Kyan Evans and just his continued growth in this Carolina offense, because the bigs are awesome. The bigs to big passing has been a huge strength of this group. But Carolina needs Kyan Evans to really be that table setting point guard. And that just wasn't a role he was playing last year at Colorado State in a very different looking offense. Him settling in as like that no doubt dude, I think will certainly alleviate those concerns, because without Trimble, that's their best point of attack defender as well, too. They also need Kyan Evans to strap up and get some stops.
Trimble's their best point of attack defender. He's their best, in my opinion, their best paint touch guard. He's the emotional leader of the team. When things were going bad last year, he was the one who was trying to steady the ship. So this is that's a major, major loss, and we're going to see how it goes. All right, Trotter, who do you have next? Who do you have next, I should say? Who are you higher on now than you were 2 weeks ago?
Let's go to the Big East. Georgetown is really interesting to me. And, it's more than just the exhibition win over Kentucky, and it's even more than what they did against Maryland, going on the road and notching a win there. I think they may have the best point guard in the Big East. Malik Mack is playing at an extremely high level. It's him or Silas Demery Jr. I don't know who else I would put in that conversation right now. And Mack, when you have an elite point guard like that, the way he's playing, I've hit the drum ad nauseum about the year 2 transfer jump. This is what's happening. You see that here with Malik Mack, like that second year with the program, I'm about like just a 20% growth in all the stats. That's kind of like what the numbers will tell you. And Mack's confident. He's running this team. He's taking open shots. He's pressing the gas in transition. He's getting them great looks. He's just carving up defenses right now at a very, very high level. So when you have the best point guard in the Big East, and then you have this type of perimeter defense, like KJ Lewis can guard, and they're bigs. Like, I had real questions about them. Like, Julius Halifanoa and Vince Iwuchukwu, like both those guys have been really solid early on. So there's still some questions about Georgetown as like a shooting team. I think they're shooting 20% from three this year as a team, right? Like they need to get Langston Love back. I made a joke about Langston Love. He's like the walking questionable guy. Like he's always questionable. Every single game for the last 3 years, he's been questionable, even dating back to Baylor. If they can get him healthy and he can be on the floor, that will certainly help this group. But I picked Georgetown, I think 6th in my Big East rankings to start the year. They're closer maybe to that top 3 or top 4 after the first couple weeks, because the point guard and the defense are legit.
Yeah, and spoiler alert, we're going to talk a little bit more about Big East teams in the next segment when we talk about disappointments. But I will say this, as someone who has, watched Ed Cooley's teams play, not just at Providence, but even at Fairfield, having lived in Connecticut, like he's at his best when he has gritty, physical teams. And when you look at the pieces he went and got out of the transfer portal, they all fit that to a T. You talked about Langston Love. Yes, he needs to get healthy. KJ Lewis from Arizona, that is exactly who he is. Deshaun Harris-Smith from Maryland, same thing. Just long, strong, physical, aggressive. Jeremiah Williams from Rutgers. Isaiah Abraham didn't get a whole lot of minutes at UConn last year, but like behind the scenes, there were positive things to say about him, and I think he's going to end up being a very good player at Georgetown. So they built a team out of the portal that fit Cooley's identity. One of the things that I think is interesting about this group, you talked about Malik Mack, I would have expected Mack's usage to go down a little bit because now they have other weapons on the perimeter. I recognize Thomas Sorber isn't there, but his usage has actually gone up since last year. So it's a really kind of counterintuitive dynamic where they're utilizing Mack more. And I think he's benefiting from the physicality, perhaps because on the defensive end of the floor, he doesn't have to take on quite as much this year. They can hide him a little bit more. Any final take from you on Georgetown before we keep it moving?
Nothing crazy, but just when you see them play, they're big and they're strong and they're nasty. And sometimes that gets lost on like when you look at the roster and you miss that, and then you see them play, you're like, that stuff plays. And especially in this version of the Big East, I think that will play up.
Yeah, I agree. I think this Georgetown team, this is a team that is made in Ed Cooley's image. Ed Cooley excels. You go back to those Providence days, he excels at making teams competitive, and he's got his types of guys who can play hard, who can get a little nasty to them. They're not going to win any shooting contests, but they will get you in the weight room. They will get you on the defensive end of the floor, and I think they're going to be a factor all year long in the Big East. Trotter, I really tried to come up with a second team that I was higher on than expected. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to talk about a conference. The ACC, I was all excited out of the gate. Virginia Tech beat Providence. Obviously, North Carolina, we already talked about that big win over Kansas. Carolina's back, right? Duke, they beat Texas. Everything looks good for the ACC. And to put it in perspective, this is a conference that I think has some questions, right? They only got 4 teams into the NCAA tournament last year. People that like the way realignment has worked for them is again somewhat counterintuitive because the Atlantic Coast Conference now has teams from the West Coast. So people are trying to figure it out. But I thought they got off to a really good start. But the last couple of days have taken some wind out of those sails. Like I said, I like Carolina. I'm not really talking about Duke because we know they're going to be elite, right? I think Virginia Tech has gotten off to a good start. I think that was a really quality win over Providence. And then Louisville beating Kentucky was huge. In the last 48 to 72 hours, though, I think the conference has missed some major opportunities. Wake Forest had Michigan absolutely on the ropes. I mean, you go back and run the scenarios, and there's got to be like a 75% chance they win that game, but they did not. Michigan escaped. Florida State had Florida on the ropes and couldn't pull it off. And then last night, Pitt gets drilled by West Virginia. So 72 hours ago, I was very enthusiastic about the ACC. I said, this is the bounce back year. 4 was a fluke a year ago. The ACC is back. And there's going to be the middle of the conference in particular is going to be a whole lot better than it was last year. Because let's face it, I think Duke they didn't win the national championship, but from start to finish, they were as good of a team as there was in college basketball last year. And I think the top of the conference is still very good. Hopefully North Carolina's in there. My opinion of the middle of the conference has been diminished a little bit. Where are you on the ACC as a whole right now?
I think it's better. And here's some teams that you didn't bring up. I think it's also part of the investment into basketball. Virginia invests into basketball with Ryan Odom. They put together a roster that's very close to $10 million, and that team can hoop. Like Malik Thomas is a stud. Thiz DeRitter is outstanding, the Belgium product. That team can really play. They're very old, and they can play. I think NC State's going to be heard from this year in this league as well. That's another team that's like in the middle-ish of the pack that's played a little bit better. And Darian Williams has been awesome, but Paul McNeil, the breakout there is certainly happening. And Virginia Tech as well. When you're able to go get a star caliber type of international product like Neoclis Abdalis, that has really changed the complexion. So I do believe that this league is better. I'd toss the Pitt one out. I think Pitt has major issues. But here's another team that I'd look at. Miami. I think Miami is now granted their schedule's super soft. We got to learn a little bit more from them, but I like the roster. I like what they've done there. Malik Renew is a high major player. True Washington's a high major player. Trey Donaldson's a high major player. Shelton Henderson looks like one of the better freshman defenders that we have out there. Dante Allen has certainly played the part. Ernest Uday played the part. They got 6 or 7 guys that I really trust. So I think the ACC is better because there's been an investment into basketball, and I do think, and you're going to end up. This take will age well. I do think in a few more weeks, especially once we get into conference play, I don't think there's going to be a scenario where the ACC and the SEC, when they do their ACC-SEC challenge, last year I think it was 14-2. The SEC won that challenge. I do not expect it to be that lopsided this year.
All right. Well, you know it is going to be lopsided when we come back and talk about the teams who have disappointed us. Don't go anywhere. That's coming up next right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back into the CBS Sports Network, where we are talking college basketball. We just broke down 4 of the teams, or 3 teams in one conference that has exceeded expectations to start the season. And now it is time for the reverse, where I am more comfortable being ornery and talking about who disappoints. Trotter, I'm going to start with the conference, if you don't mind. The Big East. Listen, I know we're only 2 weeks into the college season, but here's why this is relevant, right? College basketball is a sport that, like the storylines, it's all about March. It's all about who gets there and then what you do once you get there. And that has huge ramifications by what happens in the non-conference schedule. So that's why the first 2 weeks of the season, the first month of the season, are hugely important. And the Big East is not helping themselves. Again, I'm not talking about UConn. I'm not talking about St. John's. UConn hasn't played anybody. They play BYU on Saturday, and then the gauntlet starts for them. St. John's losing to Alabama, not the end of the world. Could have helped the conference. It doesn't. But here's what I'm talking about. Creighton, blown out by Gonzaga. Xavier, blown out at home by Santa Clara. Marquette, lost to Indiana by 23 points. DePaul, lost at home to Buffalo. Villanova drops opening night to BYU. We talked about Providence losing to Virginia. Outside of Georgetown, who we just talked about in the last segment, how about this? Here's a stat. Georgetown's win over Maryland is the Big East's only high major win of the first 2 weeks of the college season, which means when they inevitably beat up on everybody in conference play, all they're going to do is hurt each other. So I'm very concerned about the Big East, and they've got to figure out a way to turn it around really, really quickly. Quick take from you on the Big East.
How many games does UConn and St. John's lose in the Big East play that's not to each other? That's kind of like what I'm looking at. Like the rosters that they have compared to the others, it's just a huge gap, and it just can't be that way. Like there has to be an investment into basketball at some point. I think Villanova will get there eventually. I think Providence is actually going to be okay this year. That the talent on that roster, I think, is good enough to be frisky. But there is a serious gap between the top and then the bottom. And Creighton, this is going to be a down year for them. Their defensive personnel is atrocious. Marquette, I think this could be a down year for them. Their personnel is worse than what it was a year ago. Like it's gonna come back down to earth a little bit as they let the young guys get some tick. Like it really isn't surprising to me when you look at some of these rosters. Honestly, one of the teams that's been more surprising to spin it positive, Seton Hall looks competent at least. Yeah. But it's frustrating. It's frustrating when you look up and down these leagues and look at these rosters and you're like, man, a lot of these teams, it feels like they don't even have a chance to make the tournament before the season starts.
It's not good. All right. You wanted to talk about Oregon, and I'm just thrilled that you're negative about somebody. So break it down for me, because I know you're a card-carrying member of the Nate Biddle fan club.
Yeah, this really hurts my soul. But, I'm watching them play, and they've played Hawaii, they played Rice, they played South Dakota State, and all three of those mid-majors are solid. So, I'm not trying to diss on their schedule. They played good mid-major teams. But Oregon just looks clunky right now. The guard depth has been abysmal. Jackson Shelstad getting healthy is huge, and he's obviously an awesome player. Nate Biddle, I think, is maybe the best center in all of college basketball. But this supporting cast has not played very well at a high level so far to start. And offensively, it just looks clunky. They're not able to get the ball into right spots. Offensively, they're not getting great shots. They're turning it over too much. And they're playing walk-ons right now in the backcourt to try to get some actual competency. They're throwing inbounds passes off or entry passes off the backboard. It's a brutal watch at certain times right now. And now here's the thing. It's early. November basketball can be a little bit iffy. I think that Oregon has a high floor because Biddle's terrific. Their defense, I think, will be very good, especially with Devin Pryor and Kwame Evans and Biddle on the floor together. Shelstad obviously is a floor raiser offensively with what he can do. So they're going to be fine. But I kind of came into this year being like, all right, the supporting cast, all these guys are role players. They'll know that the ball needs to go to Nate Biddle and Jackson Shelstad and get out of the way, and Oregon can be a top 20 team in the country. I don't feel like that at all. They were 35th on KenPom in the preseason ratings. They're down in the mid-50s right now, and I think the tape backs that up.
All right, I know that one pained you. This one pains me, and I'm going to phrase it as a question. I'm going to lay out my rationale, and then I'm going to let you respond. Should we be worried about Florida? That's my question. Here's the rationale. Listen, I think Todd Golden is brilliant. I think he's a tremendous competitor. I have full trust that he will figure it out. But they came out, they lost to Arizona. Arizona is one of the top teams in the country. That's not bad. They almost lost to Florida State. Now, you go and you look at the metrics, and it says hey, the process has been better than the outcome. Top 10, top 20 in both offense and defense. But you dig in a little more. Here's what concerns me. Pick and roll defense really concerns me. The guard play really concerns me. They have tremendous size. I mean, they have probably the deepest front court in college basketball. And sometimes with Hawk at the three, they're playing jumbo lineups, and they're playing really fast. So they're getting the guys to sprint the floor. But what happens is when they get caught in the half court, there's nowhere to go. So Boogie Fland doesn't have quite as much room to get paint touches in the half court, and he's really tentative with his shooting right now. Defensively, pick and roll D, the guards haven't quite figured that out. I think Alex Condon has had some struggles there. So I'm looking at it on film. I'm like, this isn't good, especially in that Arizona game where I thought Koa Pete really exposed their pick and roll defense. I went to look it up. Do you know what their numbers are right now on pick and roll defense? They're in the bottom 10% of Division I basketball. I don't expect that to sustain. Like I said, I think Todd Golden's going to figure it out, but I'm worried. So I'm going to return to my original question. Should I be concerned about the defending national champions?
I'd like to see them make some threes first before like we kind of like have like the full on panic meter. Like they haven't made a three yet, and they've had some wide open looks. That Arizona game, like the wide open looks there. Florida State, they had some wide open looks and didn't convert as well. So I think when the threes go in, life will be a little bit better. I think right now, a lot of people look at Florida and go, oh, like we should be concerned because Hauck at the three isn't working. Thomas Hauck is the least of their problems. And Thomas Hauck at the three is the least of their problems. He's been terrific. I agree with you, though. Some of the questions defensively at the point of attack aren't going away. I think Boogie Flan's a fine defender, a good defender even. But Xavier Lee defensively on the ball is certainly a question mark. And they need another guard to really step up. Like they got to find that third guard. Like, is it Urban Klobsar? Could he come in and play some defense? Like, is it CJ Ingram who can come in and play some defense? And if we learned anything, like I feel like the first 3 games of this year make me appreciate how good Will Richard was. And you can look at the NBA and see what he's doing in there. He's an awesome player. Awesome player. How good Elijah Martin was defensively. Awesome player. Awesome defensively. They're missing those 2 guys because they could just really hone in on you defensively from the perimeter. And this roster, I don't think can.
Well, and Walter Clayton was just the offensive savior time and time again, particularly down that NCAA tournament began the second round against UConn. They ended up winning a national championship. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the Gators. Trotter, as always, my man, I love talking ball with you. We're going to do it every Friday here, 1 o'clock on the show. Can't wait to see you next week where we will dig into this stuff as always, but don't go anywhere because coming up next, I'm going to have one more take about the connectivity between high school recruiting, college basketball, and the NBA draft. We'll see you in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back into the CBS Sports Network, where we've been talking ball for the last hour. The fun thing about this show, and actually our coverage across all the CBS Sport platforms, is that we get to follow the prospects throughout their journey. It starts in high school recruiting, goes up through college basketball, then into the NBA draft in the beginning of their professional careers. And so simply put, while the NBA world is talking about Con Kneppel this week, you really don't appreciate his full story unless you got to see him be the leading scorer in the EYBL regular season and before that. Also in the NBA this week, people are talking about the Dallas Mavericks, where Kneppel's college teammate Cooper Flagg was just the number 1 pick. Of course, Nico Harrison was fired less than a year after trading Luka Doncic. They had less than a 2% chance of landing that number 1 pick. It came to fruition, but then in my opinion, they weren't prepared to support Cooper Flagg. Now, the talking point is about whether or not they should rebuild. My take is this: college basketball's freshman class is awesome. The high school senior class doesn't have nearly the same star power. So whether you're Dallas, Boston without Jason Tatum, Indiana without Tyrese Halliburton, or anyone else, my message is this: if you're going to tank or rebuild, do it now. The draft will never be better, at least in the foreseeable future, than it will in 2026.